Everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild player supplement Faiths of the Forgotten Realms 2, designed by Micah Watt, aka Pyromaniac Press, with Scott Bean, Ryan Langr, Isaac May, Bryan Holmes, Marquis, Hartis, Steve Fidler, and Gregersen, Ashley May, Justyn, Johnston for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, and Chris, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, Numa, Marcos de Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, AK, Cert2B, Adam, Dithers, Lounge, Sam, Rosh, Limpy Spuds, and Jerome. Thank you all very much for your support. Boy, it's going to be a mouthful with some of these DM's Guild adept works. So when I first thought of Faiths of the Forgotten Realms, I thought that was a lore book about the deities, the gods and goddesses, and the various religions of the Forgotten Realms world. That's not entirely correct. What it is a collection of a lot of new player class subclasses, archetypes. So all the ones you get at like level 3, or in the case of like clerics and warlocks and sorcerers, maybe a few levels earlier than that. But the first one added, I believe, a bunch of new subclass archetypes for specifically just paladins and clerics. Faiths of the Forgotten Realms 2, Faith Boogaloo, Faith Harder, Two Faith, Two Furious, I'll stop, expands that to every class with an asterisk that it's still mostly focused on clerics and paladins. It is over 150 pages long, also includes over 100 spells and some magic items and holy texts, which is really impressive. It means there's a lot going on in here. It also means I'm going to have to kind of skim through it because there's no way I'm going to be able to cover all of the things in here, as opposed to products I get that are just, say, 1 or 5 or 10 player class archetypes. So there's way too many for me to sit there and analyze. From what I can tell, they all felt very well balanced, and a lot of them were kind of just reskinning or retheming existing player class archetypes into different versions. Druid does this a lot. For example, a Druid of Lolth will obviously have extra ability to shift into spider forms, or a Druid of the Ooze, if you worship Ganondar, will have, ooze powers and be able to have some, walls of ooze, new spells, which is really cool. So some of them are easier than others, and there's literally like a cleric for every single one of them, because that's kind of the point. Initially, I was thinking this would be kind of a negative, but because it's still themed around specifically classes based on, following deities. Obviously, clerics and paladins are specifically built for that, for the ground up, to have specific tenets on following those kind of deities. So it makes sense that literally half of them, and I wrote it down, you can literally see on this piece of paper, I kind of wrote down notes, because unfortunately, if you look at the table of contents, the way this is organized is entirely by deity, and even then it's just by racial deities. So from what I understand, the first Faiths of the Forgotten Realms does a lot of the ones that we've all probably heard of. I think like your Banes, your Merkles, your Soons, and Lythanders, all of those different deities. This one expands that into ones that are maybe a little bit more racial specific, specifically non-human. So a lot of drow gods and goddesses. The dragon ones are basically just Bahamut and Tiamat. Dwarves, you got like Moradin, elven, gnomes, halflings, and orcs. So that has a lot of really cool possibilities. The actual details on the gods and goddesses themselves are a little bit light. Usually we just get a few paragraphs, and it kind of gets down to the bare minimum of what you need to know about how they operate, rather than like a big history of these deities, which again is what I thought this was all about, was going to be this bigger treasure trove of information. If you are interested in having somebody that's really into their religion or has been affected by it or whatever else, has a backstory, intertwined with that faith, that you could build a character out of. The one saving grace here is that we get really, really cool, well-written background story options with every single one of them, which is really nice to see. It's a D4 table, and all of these different gods and goddesses have different background stories, which is really fun. They all have to do with, and it kind of probably, not necessarily assuming an acolyte background, but just the fact that your paths, your backstory in some way crossed with like a temple or something. It doesn't necessarily mean like you were raised in this temple, but for whatever reason, you do follow this faith, and that's the idea of where you get your powers from. So I think it's a really cool add to see here is the background information. That was kind of the saving grace, because I was a little disappointed in the actual information on the deities themselves. What I was not disappointed in are the subclasses, which are, for the most part, pretty awesome. We can go through a couple of the ones, the notes I made. I already mentioned the Ganondar Druid, Circle of the Ooze, which is pretty nifty. You can, of course, shape into oozes, eventually split yourself into different ooze forms, which is neat. The Wizard has a cool death tradition. This is based on Kironsali, and I'm probably going to mispronounce a bunch of these. That when you kill people at 10th level, you can rise them up as zombies, and at 14th level, you can actually possess your zombies and use them to cast your own spells, which is just really, really fun. Let's see, 26. I wrote down page numbers because I have to do that when you have products that are like over 100 pages long. A barbarian, of course, all the drow stuff is all spider, so it's all poison immunity and, you know, summoning spiders and shifting into spiders. And the barbarian, literally, when it rages, it can grow like spider fangs, for example. 32 is a good example of backgrounds that I really liked. Zinzarina, which is a persecuted drow goddess, which is a goddess of like illusions and assassins and stealth. One of the background story options, I'm just going to read this because I think it's really cool. I was an innocent bystander as I watched a drow assassin carry out their work with unparalleled efficiency. And when their eyes met mine, I was certain I would die. The assassin simply flicked the blood from their blade, returned it to its sheath, and fled. Cannot help feeling that Zinzarina whispered to them and that she has another purpose planned for me. That's awesome. That's really cool. Or this one, I was born with magic in my veins. Within hours of my birth, I was spirited away in secrecy to protect me from a family that would see me as a curse. I was raised in shadows, and I have always walked in the footsteps of my goddess, the hunted, for my life mirrors her own. So very well written, some cool like story seed ideas. You get 4 of those for every single of the deities, which is really, really fun. Let's see, 36 had, that's right, the dwarven god of greed, Abathor. The barbarian is the path of the hoarder. You can literally spend money. It's called Tax of the Trove Lord during your attacks during a reckless attack to avoid having granting your opponents advantage on you. And at 14th level, you can pull from Abathor's vault, which is a giant D20 list of pretty cool weapons, like magical weapons you can pull. You have to like throw them as part of the action, so it's basically a one-time attack. But that's still really cool about just being a pull out like a random magic weapon from a portal and throw that at somebody. So that's a really neat idea. And it's also interesting that a lot of these do come up with thematic ways for having a deity style class, so a non-cleric paladin, and still thematically tie them both to their own class abilities, but also to whatever their chosen deity is. And there's a lot of really neat ideas with that. For the most part, I think they do a good job with like barbarians and druids and rangers. There's a few cool rogues. I liked the wizards. The ones that really get the short end of the staff, though, again, you can see the notes I had to write down because there's not a table of contents that tells you exactly like where all of these are. There's only 2 sorcerer bloodlines, and there's only 1 warlock patron. You'd think with friggin' deities that warlock would be all about that you could just manifest those as a patron relationship rather than you worshiping them through the traditional cleric or paladin paths. So that's a bit disappointing that all the classes were not treated equal here. I'm not surprised that cleric and paladin make up half of them. Literally, I think 49 by my calculation of the 100 classes were clerics and paladins, but it is a bummer. And I think druids are next to 12, ranger at 9. Most of them are around 5 or 6 for the rest of them, but sorcerer and warlock, sorry, you guys got a bit shafted. 43 is another dwarven one. Dwarves have a lot of fun. They can grow a silver beard that gives them additional armor class and charisma checks against fellow dwarves. That's really cool. I did like one of the 2 sorcerer bloodlines a lot, which is a psionic bloodline, which is great to use psionic powers without having to build a whole psionic class around that. So you're still a sorcerer, but you gain extra kind of like invocation type abilities, except they're more like maybe like maneuvers. One of them is kind of like the Great Old One. You can do a mind link, and they're all tied to different stats, but you can choose 2 of them at first level, and at 6th level, you can either choose a 3rd one or choose to improve one of the ones that you already have. You also get, I believe, you can add your intelligence modifier to your initiative rolls. Just felt like a really cool ass bloodline, and something really different from the ones that are usually used in terms of like elemental damage and that kind of thing. Just pure psionicist, which is very, very cool. And some of the dwarven gods are, Dwerger specifically. So that's why you'll have things that are like, Illithid themed or like slave master themed. So a bunch of like chains and, capturing people is like part of the abilities, because these are, dwarves encompasses both, regular dwarves and deep dwarves. Let's see. Sky-themed druid was pretty cool, or sky-themed rangers and believe it, or was it druid? Yeah, druid circle of the sky and a ranger skywalker had to do with a lot of flying abilities and shooting people and summoning up gusts of wind was cool. 95 was a lone wolf ranger, which was a neat idea because I haven't seen mechanics like this before, where you get bonuses if there's none of your allies within 5 feet of you, which is pretty cool for somebody that, again, is a god tied to like the lone hunter archetype. 119 for a gnomish god, I believe. You get a giant raccoon friend, druid circle of the raccoon. Instead of just shapeshifting into, raccoons, no, you get a just giant raccoon friend, which is fucking hilarious. I really like that one. And my favorite one for the orc, as we're skipping, again, I can't go through all of these, but I'm telling you, there's a lot of good stuff in here. College of the War Caller. I really like the idea of the orc who's like the classic, drumming, like battle bard who's inspiring all his allies to charge forward, and that's exactly how his different abilities work. So lots of really fun things in here. For the most part, none of them honestly caused me to like raise an eyebrow in terms of like, oh, this is way unbalanced. Unlike a lot of ones I do read on the DM's Guild, they all feel very, very well balanced, which is incredibly impressive when you have 100 of these to choose from. It's really, really nuts. I did like these holy texts and magic items as well. They're, tied to the theme. The holy text could be used as, storytelling MacGuffins. I believe there's not exactly one for each deity. Maybe for like a 4th of them or a 5th of them, there's a holy text that's got a little bit of backstory to it, which is very nice. Notice how all of these, and this is true for everything before this, have author attributations to them, which is very, very nice. This is a specific complaint I've had in previous DM's Guild Adept or compilation programs where it was a bunch of different authors came together and provided, something within the context of a single product. And one of my complaints has always been, well, who did what? I'd really like to know that. And sometimes I'll have it at the back of the book or whatever else. This one puts it directly in the text itself and in the middle of all the other things. So like, I believe Ashley May ends up writing a lot of those story backgrounds that I loved. And then other folks will actually do the different subclasses themselves. So that's really nice to see, for the main purpose that if I end up, enjoying one particular author several times through, then I can be like, oh man, I really need to look this author up on, the DM's Guild and see what else they're all about, because their style fits my own very well. So I really, really like to see that on these programs that have all these multiple authors in them. I mean, there's, I think, what is that, a dozen that I read off for this product. I love to see individual pieces being attributed to those authors. That's very, very cool to see. And obviously a thing at the end that tells you exactly a little biography for each author is very nice to have. So I'm very positive on this entire product. I'm a little annoyed by, I was hoping for more information on the individual deities. I still thought that is probably like the weakest part, which is odd because it's called Face of the Forgotten Realms. I just feel like, just based on the title, I thought it was going to be more information about those deities, more about their history, who worships them, what are they all about. Instead, we get a very minimal kind of breakup, which I do like how it's organized between, a lot of them are like, here's why non-people would worship, or non-people, like a non-Dwerger would worship this Dwerger god for whatever reason. And this is, just a brief tenets of whatever this god's philosophies are. That's kind of the bare minimum. I was hoping to get more information about these deities just because I thought that's what this was all about. It's all about, Face of the Forgotten Realms. But instead, it's really just using just enough to be able to apply that god's philosophy and themes into different character builds. So it's much more of a mechanical book than it is a book you could draw role-playing things from. Like, I honestly feel like if I was building a character, which I love to do, I honestly, one of my favorite games, Neverwinter Nights, back in the day, I love just theory crafting characters and building them based on various themes. But the problem is, as much as I would really love to do that with all these, all of these give me so many good ideas, which is awesome, but I would still have to like do a Google search of that particular deity to really get all the information that I want. And I shouldn't have to do that with a product that's specifically about Faiths of the Forgotten Realms. I should have like all the information I need to be able to build that character, not just mechanically, because that is all here and all outstanding, but also from a role-playing and just information background, so that I feel like I know as much about that deity as I can, because I'm basing my entire, character concept and character build around that particular faith. So that is honestly, it's kind of a minor complaint, because at this point we're giving quantity over quality. Not to say that it's not good quality. I think it is. It's just a little bit more brief than I thought it was. Instead, each individual deity is a lot shorter information. Instead, we just get a lot of subclasses, which there's an astounding amount here. If you paired this with Faith 1, I think you would cover just about everything. I do think this one is probably more useful than Faith 1. I haven't looked at Faith 1, by the way. I'm just based on the product description. Just because we do get more options of different character classes, which is a big, big plus. Having, I believe Faith 1 was all clerics and paladins. 100 of those, that's a bit much, even though that one I think covers more of the traditional deities that we would be familiar with. But having the variety is very useful to have. So I like that, even though we didn't get a whole lot of love for my beloved sorcerers and warlocks. All right. Pros and cons for Faiths of the Forgotten Realms 2, Faith Harder. Pro, 100 interesting and thematic archetypes for every class, though mostly clerics and paladins, but still, 100 is pretty freaking awesome. And the fact that they're all pretty well balanced and they're all pretty interesting. I mean, I just spouted off a couple of my favorites, but honestly, hardly any of them did I think were, boring or problematic in any way. Yes, there are a lot that overlap with some that already exist. Like there's a cleric domain that's literally like the Soul Forge domain, and it's obviously, or Soul Heart or something, and it's very, very similar to the Forge domain that's already given in Xanathar's. You're gonna get some of those, because with 100 archetypes, there's not enough things that are going to be that different from the ones that we already have, if you include the likes of Xanathar's and Sword Coast Adventures Guide and all the things that added new things since the player's handbook. So you will have some overlaps, but for the most part, very, very impressed, and some really fun original ideas. Pros, holy texts and magic items provide thematic MacGuffins and equipment. I'm assuming you use holy texts as MacGuffins. Maybe you want to use them as actual magic items, but as they're presented here, they're basically storytelling tools. But the magic items are very cool to see that, because they could be thematically tied into those characters. Pro, every entry is properly attributed to the right author. That's so cool to see. That's, I think, literally the first time I've seen that in a DM's Guild Adept product, where it has different authors contributing in different ways. It was very cool to see that individually, and I think it looks nice the way it's formatted. It's all very professionally well done. I appreciate that immensely. Cons, the table of contents is really kind of terrible for a product this big. This is the bare minimum, which is separating them by Pantheon, but this doesn't tell me anything about, if I were to say, oh man, I remember that one like timeless monk I liked that had time powers. Wait, where the fuck was that? Like, I have no idea where to find that in here. So having a more broken up table of contents that separated by actual god and goddess, and then did another subheading that was the actual subclasses within each one, would have been vastly appreciated. And con, I do think there's a quantity over quality approach when it comes to the individual deity and all of their various details. We're just given a ton of them and kind of the bare minimum to form the mechanics around it and get the theme. But I kind of want even more information on those actual faiths. Final verdict. With 100 new subclasses and spells, Faiths of the Forgotten Realms 2 provides a truly divine resource for creating highly thematic character concepts. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.